So welcome to this session. It's a pleasure for me to be here. It's a pleasure for me also to give the first session today. So my name is Stéphane Nicoll. I'm working for Pivotal. I'm a member of the Spring Boot team and the Spring Framework team. So everything that you're going to see today is basically what the team is working on a daily basis. It's an introduction, but if you're using Spring Boot, you'll see that you'll find, hopefully, some nice tips and tricks that you probably may not know. If you want to reach out to me, you have my Twitter account there. Don't be shy. Please get in touch. Please report anything you'd like us to discuss. And we have a lot of slides, so we should probably let's get to it right away. This was supposed to be a joke. Unfortunately, it can't be a joke because my slides were not displayed. So it's about telling you that there is no slides in this presentation. So if you're a fan of slides, it's time for you to leave. OK. Let's get started. And if you want to get started with Spring and Spring Boot, you might want to use this website, start.spring.io. Start.spring.io is very, very simple. It allows you to choose the build system you want to use, the Spring Boot version you want to use, and usually, well, not usually, if you don't specify anything, you'll get the default stable, so 141, as you can see there. Then you can, on the left-hand side, you can specify basic information about your project. And once you've done that, and you can keep the default, or you can, I don't know, do something like that. Then you can shop for dependencies, okay? So I want to build a web application. I want to use JPA. I need a database, so for my simple app, I'm going to use H2. I want to expose my REST repositories, my data JPA repositories as REST endpoints. I want to add DevOps feature to my project. And I want to benefit from development tools, so local development tools that help me working on my project more efficiently. Once you've done that, you can click here, and you'll basically get an empty project, and you can start coding. So this is what we are going to do in the next 50 minutes or so, and I hope we'll have time for questions. But I'm not going to start by that, because the next step would be for me to extract that zip file somewhere and then import that in my favorite IDE. But that's too much, right? We can do better. So let's do better. And I'm going to show you something based on IntelliJ IDE. If you're using Eclipse STS, you'll get the same feature. If you're using NetBeans now, you'll get the same features. Since there's a nice plugin that was implemented a few months back. So I'm going to create a new project, right? You're in your IDE, that's the story. I'm going to choose Spring Initializer. And then you see that I'll get the same nice options. Actually, you can see that you have more options there. There's no magic. Those options are available here. OK? I'm going just to keep that. By the way, I'm also going to demo with Maven. If you're a Gradle users, everything I'm going to show you today will work with Gradle as well. Then I'm shopping for dependencies, right? So I'm going to say only web this time. I'm not going to choose anything else. Next, let's put it there, and done. And what happens now is the IDE is going to contact that service, download the zip file for me, extract the zip file where I specified, and configure the project. So if I look at my project right now, I even have a run config ready to use. So all that's required for me now is to run the app. OK? So what I want you to remember is where I'm going to code, where I'm going to spend my time. And you'll see that I will spend 99% of my time in the IDE. That's what we want you to do. That's where you're the most productive as a developer. So what do I get with this service? I basically get this empty app that does nothing. It has a main method. I get a configuration file that's empty for now, and some directories. Maybe this is related to template engine. Maybe this is some web resources we'll see later during this presentation. And I have an empty test, so I can start writing my test directly in it. OK? So what I want to show you, during this presentation is mainly two things, and we'll see if we have time for the third. One thing is the developer experience of using Spring Boot. So what kind of features you get when you need to integrate a new stack, when you need to integrate a new library. What do you need to do that? How do you make that happen? So that's one. And you'll see that Boot is really helping you from a configuration standpoint. It's giving you tools to configure your app, to package your app, to run your app, and to test your app. But it does not reinvent the wheel. So if you used to write a JPA application, you're not going to change all of a sudden. If you want to secure your application, you're not going to change all of a sudden. But if you want to try something, and if you have no opinion about how your application needs to be configured, Spring Boot will do something for you. We'll see that right now. So, oh yeah, sorry, I forgot one thing, is the build file. And as you can see, the build file is quite simple for now. There's two dependencies that we call starter. Remember that term because we are going to use that during the presentation. So starter web is something that allows you to build a web application. And starter test is a collection of things that will help you writing your tests. OK, so whenever you demo something new, oh, by the way, I forgot to ask that. Who's using Spring Framework already? Spring, plain Spring. OK, that's 80%, 90% maybe. Who's already using Spring Boot? That's 50%, I would say. Spring Boot in production? That's 40%. OK, so let's pretend those who know Spring Boot that they don't know that for a minute. The first thing you do when you want to try something is hello world, right? You want to do a very simple example and see what it looks like. So this is a web application. So I'm going to create a controller. I'm going to call that home controller. And I'm going to say it's a REST controller. And I'm simply going to write a very basic HTTP endpoint. When you invoke the root of the app, so slash, I'm going to return a simple message, something like that, right? REST controller is an annotation that flags that class as a controller for a REST endpoint. And the method there is simply mapping an HTTP URI to this content, which is basically saying hello Kyiv. So I'm going to start that. And something will happen. Oh, by the way, so no magic here again. This is a main class, right? There is no parameter, nothing. Nothing, main class. So let's go on 8080, and I have an app. Right? It is simple, and this is how development must be. If you think about it, a bit more, let's say that it's a web application, right? Remember, let's say that I want to debug this application, and I want to debug an HTTP endpoint. So if you build a regular application as a WAR file and you deploy that WAR file somewhere, OK, IDE have tools to help you. Let's ignore for a minute that they don't have that. You need to set up a remote debugger, start the app, connect your remote debugger to the Tomcat server or whatever server you're using, and start debugging. If you want to debug a Spring Boot app, be it a web application or not, well, you click the debug button, because it's a main, because it's fully integrated in your IDE. So what happened, right? You added a dependency. I started to code something very simple, and I have a server, Spring MVC, and my controller set up. Spring Boot has this notion of auto-configuration with smart conditions. So basically, it's a two-step process. One is Spring Boot will find that you've added certain dependencies to your project, and it will find that you have no opinion about them. So there is no configuration in this app, as you can see. So if we go back to our application, that's basically this. This is a Spring Boot application, nothing else. You have no opinion yet. You have Spring MVC, you have Tomcat embedded on the class path. That's what the Spring Boot Starter Web brings. And you have no opinion. So if you have all that, it probably means that you want to build a web application, right? So let's configure that for you. So let's create an embedded Tomcat server. Let's configure Spring MVC on it. And if you look at component scan, at Spring Boot application, you'll see it's component scan. So that class here is going to be scanned automatically. It's a REST controller. We are going to integrate that in your application. Simple. But it's maybe a bit too simple. So let's do something a bit more fancy. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to add a JPA entity and expose a repository for it. Okay, not super fancy, but still, this is something that lots of applications are doing. So I need to add JPA, basically. So what's the workflow to add JPA? Spring Boot starter, something, JPA. Okay. I need to add a database. And as I told you initially, I'm going to use H2 for this simple demo. And I only do that on runtime. I don't need to compile against it. And I want to expose those repositories as REST endpoints. So let me do that very quickly. You'll see that there is no versions in those dependencies. We don't specify the version, even for H2, right? So something else is providing that to us. I'm going to come back on that in a minute. So I have JPA, so the starter for JPA, a starter for exposing data as REST endpoints. Data REST will expose not only JPA, but any kind of repository you might have. So I'm back to really coding. I'm really focused on coding. I'm not focusing on infrastructure. So I have a speaker thing ready for you, so that I don't code too much thing in front during the talk. So I have a speaker. It's an entity. It's a JPA entity. Okay. You won't find any weird Spring Boot import in there. There's no need to. And I want a repository. So that's probably somewhere, yeah, that one. Here we go. I want a repository. Who doesn't know about Spring Data, since most of the audience knows Spring? Who doesn't know about Spring Data? A few hands, okay. So Spring Data is an abstraction for data access. As you can see, this repository extends from CRUD repository, and CRUD is going to give you nice default methods for data access. You can see it's a repository for speaker, and the type of the primary key is long. And I'm adding 2 search queries. And what Spring Data will give me, again, Spring Boot does nothing about the actual feature. What Spring Data is going to give me is it's going to implement a proxy for me. So it's going to implement that interface for me, and I can inject that in my code without implementing anything. It will use the method signature to derive the kind of query to run. So as you may expect, it will search a speaker that has a specific Twitter account. You'll see also that there are REST-related annotations there. I'm going to come back on this in a minute. So the last thing I want to do is I want to have some data in my store, and I'm using a feature from Hibernate called import.sql. So if that file is present at the root of the class path, it's going to use it. Okay, so let's restart my app with those changes. And let's see what that endpoint looks like. Here we go. I have data. Okay? So at this point, I understand it may sound a bit magic for those who doesn't know about Spring Boot. Really, what you need to focus on right now is, if you don't have any opinion, you'll get something out of the box. If you don't like it, you can change it. You can customize it. And if you want to use your own configuration, you can do so. So if you have an existing app with some configuration and you want to migrate to Spring Boot will detect in your configuration that you've defined things, and it will use that. It will not apply the automatic system. We'll see that in a minute with the next demo. So how did that happen? Well, if you go back to what I said previously, I have Hibernate on my class path now with the starter data JPA. If you bring Hibernate to your project, it's probably because you want to use it, right? Otherwise, you wouldn't. And you have no opinion, again, still no config. So I'm going to bootstrap Hibernate for you. Whenever I have to do that in a Spring app or any app, I always go on Stack Overflow to find the right code to write, because it's very easy to forget about that thing. We talk about component scan. You see that my JP entity is under that package. So the default is just to scan the package for JP entities and automatically build a persistence unit for you. So you don't have to create any persistent.xml, nothing. And Spring Data JPA will also bring the repository support for JPA. There is a repository in also a package that's scanned. So we are going to process it for you and create a proxy for you. That's the first step. Second step, second dependency, is there is data rest on the class path. It's an MVC application, so I'm going to integrate those repositories directly as endpoints. So you can see that the repository is named speaker repository, so the convention in Spring Data is to remove the repository part and add a S. That's why the endpoint is speakers. That's the default you get. And back to this customization here. So you'll see that actually you get a very nice API with search methods and everything. You'll see that the find by Twitter, find by last name is find by last name, because the default is to use the method name. And you'll see that here it has been customized. So if I type something like that, I'm actually going to invoke a search on that repository with those arguments. Well, that argument in this case. So you get a very, very, very nice experience out of the box. We're talking about data rest in here, but if you go back on the site, this is the thing that we support. So there's plenty of things for you to try, and for each of those, Spring Boot will have some auto-configuration for you. I don't have time to show everything, of course. I'm not sure even I tried everything. No, I didn't try everything for sure. But my message mainly is I'm showing you stuff for data JPA, but you can apply that to many others. OK. I have an app which exposes very sensitive data, as you can see. So the next step for me would be to secure it, right? It's a web application, so we probably need to secure it. So what does it take to secure it? Anyone? Add the starter. Yes, thank you. So Spring Boot starter, as you may guess, there is a Spring Boot starter security. And let me just restart the app, and I'm not changing anything to it. So again, new dependency means that new conditions will be applied because you have new things on your class path that Spring Boot knows about. And if I do that, I need to log in now with a basic authentication login. So it's not really fancy, probably something you will never do. But if you want to try something, if you want to initiate your app and then dig into the details, that's fine enough as a default. again, no reason to not secure the application with default settings if you have Spring Security on your ClassPass, right? There's a reason why you added that. You can't have Spring Security on your ClassPass and not want to use it. Otherwise, you probably have a dependency problem. OK, so it's time for questions now. So you think that you can just sit back and relax? Wrong. I need to log in this app. So I need a username and a password. And those who know the answer probably should let the ones that don't try to find it. What would be that username password? What can I type there to log in? What would be sensible? I don't. If it's the real answer, don't tell it.
OK, the default username is user, and the password was in the logs when the application starts.
OK, so you ruined my joke now. Thank you. Thank you for the answer anyway. So I wanted you to try to guess what the password might be for those who doesn't know. So usually when I ask that questions, I get admin, Spring boot, admin boot, user secret, stuff like that. So the username is user, as he mentioned. And now we need a password. So if we need a password, we need to write it down in some doc. And since it's automated, you don't do anything and you get that. Let's say that we write in our doc that the password is admin123, secret, whatever. Then anybody can read that. And if you forget to actually fix your configuration, fix your app, for whatever reason, because you're lazy or I don't know what, then anybody can log into your app, and we don't want that. So what we do is every time the application starts, we generate a password for you. OK? So let me paste that, and then I can log in. OK? There's two things about that. One is it changes every time you start the app. OK? And two, it's impossible to remember. And we do that on purpose so that you fix your configuration. That's why we do it like that. So let's fix it. So again, this is the first time where I'm having an opinion about the config. This is the first time where I'm about to write configuration code or configuration infrastructure versus actual business code. So to do that, what I could do for this very simple demo, I have something prepared, I think. Yes. I could write this. Again, Spring Security code, it's not Spring Boot. So you don't need to learn a new language. You don't need to learn a new framework, sorry. This is regular Spring Security. And I'm going to create two users with those roles. So let me restart the app with those changes. And if I do, you'll notice that there is no password in the log anymore. And I'm going to log in as 0, and I can log in. But still, I had to log in, right? So even though I gave an opinion about one part of the config, I still get all the auto-configuration mechanism on security. So the auto-configuration is in boot is not everything or nothing. It's made of several steps, and at each steps we identify if you've provided a configuration, a customization. And if you do, we are going to use that and carry on with the auto-configuration with your customizations. So the point I'm trying to make is it's not a system where everything is magically auto-configured for you and there's nothing you can do about it. Remember, if you have your own configuration for something, we'll detect it and we will back off. Great. So that's the kind of user experience you get with boot. I could keep on doing that with many other starters. I could, for instance, integrate MongoDB, Neo4j, Couchbase. I could I could integrate messaging, I could have some AMQP endpoints, some GMS endpoints, so I can do plenty of things. That's really the first thing I wanted to show you today. But the second thing I want to show you is the features the unique features that Boot bring. To do that, before I do that, anybody notice the wonderful banner there, right? Probably the most important feature in Spring Boot. Let's fix it. So, as in Boot, everything you do, there is a default. Like in Maven, if you put your file in SSIM in Java, we will compile that by default. With Boot, it's the same thing. So I'm going to change the banner. We'll see what it looks like in a minute. And I'm also going to add a new dependency called the actuator. And the actuator actually, so let's maybe first look at the wonderful banner there. So you can do ASCII art in your Boot app if you want. You can even drop an image now. So we will extract an ASCII art from the image. That's new in 1.4. Anyway, we have fun. Actuator is going to bring administrative feature to your application. It will bring DevOps feature to your application. So regardless of the kind of application that you build, you'll always have to have a configuration infrastructure. You'll always have to be able to see what's going on in your app when it's running in production. You'll have to debug your application for whatever reason, or get metrics, or get statistics about your app. Spring Boot has a default solution for that, so if you drop Spring Boot Starter Actuator in your app, you'll get those extra features, and I want to showcase them. So the idea here is you add that, and it's automatically configured, so it's basically meta-auto configuration, if you will. Dropping that on your class path, firing up a Spring Boot app, and you'll get extra endpoints. Because it's a web app. So one thing also is, I'm working with a web application here. If you want to have a command line, a daemon application, or something that's not non-web, Spring Boot is a perfect fit for it too. OK, environment is the first one. Bam, failed. Oh, 4.4, that's not what I expected. I guess it didn't took, I was too fast to restart the app. Let's see. Yes. Oh, it failed now. What a surprise. So it's failing, and it's, you can see also another feature of Boot is the default error page that you can customize if you want. Whenever there is an exception that the server cannot handle, you'll get this. If your accept header says that you want HTML, if you're in a browser, that's what you'll get automatically. And if you have a client machine, so if you're trying to get some resources from the server, for instance, with a JSON output, you'll get a JSON output with the content of the error by default, which is, I think, quite nice. So that thing is basically telling me that I don't have the right to access the resources. Anybody know why I can't access the resource? Okay, you can give the real answer now. I won't be mad, I promise. Yes. So the answer is I don't have the role to access that resource. So I'm going to maybe ask an extra question if they didn't understand your full answer. What role may that be? What role do I need to access this endpoint? What do you think? What would be the name of the role? Admin. That's right. So this is what you get by default with Spring Boot, is you need to be an admin, so you need to have the admin role to log in. So that's not the one I wanted to look for. Yes, this is the one. This is my config now. And for whatever reason, in my app, with my infrastructure, my security infrastructure, I'm a hero and I'm a user. I need to be an admin to be able to log in there. So I could do that, right? Restart the app, done. But I don't want to do that. And we don't want you to do that. So Spring Boot provides default for certain things when it auto-configure your infrastructure, but we don't want you to bend your domain and your configuration to our default. So I'm not going to do this. I'm going to just remove that. And I'm going to fix it in a different way, but before I do, I want to add an extra dependency. That will be the last one, I think. It's called DevTools. And DevTools is something that you'll use only in your IDE. By the way, I'm still in my IDE for 30 minutes now, coding, no shell, no Maven, Gold, nothing. I'm going to start my app again. And as you can see, it's still failing, right? But now I have an extra feature. I have an extra local development feature. Is boot will be automatically configured in local development mode, and it will give you extra feature. Okay? And one of those features is to expose a live reload server. So if you've done JavaScript development in your life, you probably know about that stuff. So live reload, we don't do that. It's a separate company working on this. They have this live reload server and the free live reload client, so you can basically connect to the server. And once you've done that, the server can send commands to your browser. And one of those commands is refresh. Spring Boot implements a very, very, very basic live reload server. So I can connect to it now. This is done. So previously, the circle was empty. Now it's full, if you can see that. I can hardly see it, but I think it says, yes, I'm connected. Back to my problem, access denied. I don't want to change my code. I want Spring Boot to actually bend to my code and not the other way around. I want Boot to adapt to my settings, to my configuration, and not the other way around. So the way to do this, we've already seen that you can write code and Boot will back off and will use your thing instead. The other thing you could do is configure a property. Okay? So every auto configuration has a list of keys with a certain namespace. And you can tune the way the auto configuration works only by specifying a few properties. So now I need to know the key. I need to know the key to change the name from admin to hero, right? That's what we want to do, to be able to access that at point. I told you about a configuration file, which is empty for now. So now I need to find the key, and I need to give the hero value. So how do I do that? Well, you could go on Google, right? Maybe you can try Stack Overflow. I heard once that someone was reading the doc. That doesn't happen very often. We know that for sure, trust me. But we wanted to do something better for you guys. And what we wanted to do is we wanted you to stay in the IDE. Don't switch tools, don't switch context, stay in the IDE. So I need role, right? I need to find something with a role. So I can type role, and I get this nice auto-completion. Again, if you're using Eclipse, if you're using NetBeans, you'll find plugins for the exact same feature. You can see that the role in this case is here. And by the way, you can also see that there is deprecation support, which is really nice. In previous version, you could only specify one role. In 1.4, you can specify more than one. So this one is basically deprecated to this one. And you can also see the default value, and you can see basic information about it. So let me do this. Hero, right? This is what I want. Oh, something is happening. Ooh, and I can access my endpoint now. Two things. I change a value. I saved or compiled in the IntelliJ IDE world. DevTools running on my machine detected that I changed some file, and it automatically refreshed the application for you, and when it's done, it tells the browser to refresh. So what that means is you code, you save, and bam, your browser refresh with the changes without you having to restart the app. That's one. And two, it's not a cold restart. We're not shutting down the VM. We can't. We actually restart the application, the Spring application context, meaning that all the caches are still full when we do that. So the restart is much faster than when you start the application for the first time. Let's have a look to this endpoint. You can see that my little key is referenced here. So if you go to an application in production, you connect to that endpoint, you know exactly how it has been configured. You know everything about the configuration of this app. You have a full view on the environment. This is also a REST endpoint, right? So if you ask for a specific key, you'll get the value for that specific key. So if you have a monitoring system that makes sure all your applications are running with Java 8, it's an HTTP call, right? Probably hard to be much simpler than that. You can integrate whatever custom management system you have with that HTTP call. You get the value, and you make sure that the environment is proper. You can do more. If we have fans of the core Spring, you can see your full application context. Okay? So you can see, for instance, that my security config here is being defined in this class. I can find my controller again. So if you have something that does not behave as it should, you can fire up that endpoint. It's quite advanced. There are less advanced, more higher value options than this one. But you can really check that the application context contains the bean that should have been defined. About the auto-config now, remember that I told you about the auto-configuration will check if certain conditions are met, and it will do something if that's the case. You can get a full auto-config report on the command line if you activate the debug mode, but you can also use that endpoint. And that endpoint basically lists all the things that have been applied and all the things that have not been applied, and it tells you why. So I told you about GMS. So for instance, let's look at GMS. GMS, it will tell me, this class is not present, so I'm not going to do anything. Maybe that class is present. Maybe you have a connection factory. OK, I'm not going to do anything. And if any of those back-off conditions do not apply, then I'm going to do something for you. Who knows what kill -3 PID on a Unix system does? Kill -3 and the name of the process. Louder, probably, if you want to answer. Thread dump, exactly. So when you have concurrency issue, it only happens in production, right? We all know that. Only in production. And one way to figure out what's going on in an app in production is to generate a thread dump to see what is actually going on. So who had to fill a form to actually SSH the production machine to run that command? A few. OK. I did. It was a 5-page long thing. Well, with Spring Boot, you do that. Dump, and you get a thread dump. Then you can export that to whatever system you have and start analyzing why the application is failing. If you want to more feature, you can use trace. Gives you a trace of the incoming request, so you can see I just invoked dump. This is my request header. This is the response header. So if an application or a particular endpoint doesn't behave the way it should, you can actually look why it doesn't work. You can also see if the application is healthy. Is my app healthy? Is it up? Yes, it is up. There is enough disk space. And yes, the database is up. I've tried to open a connection. I've tried to run a dummy SQL query, a validation query. That passed. So the data source is up. I want to show you now how you can integrate with that. And I told you since the very beginning, every code that you write, you'll see there is no Spring Boot imports. That's because these are existing features, so we're not reinventing existing features. But this is a Spring Boot specific feature. So let's have a look. I want to add a new entry in this output. So what does it take to do it? I'm going to create some code here. So I'm going to create a bean. And I'm going to create an health indicator. And as you can see, as you will see, my health indicator is very smart. Very, very smart. Trust me. I'm going to say, in this case, the application is up. Or it's actually no, I changed my mind. It's not. It's down. And you can see that you have a builder approach where you can specify many things. Okay? I forgot to build that thing. Easy, right? Done. I changed a configuration file. It was processed by Spring Boot. I changed some code, it was processed by Spring Boot. Okay? So I didn't do anything except save, make. Spring Boot DevTools restarted the app, asked the browser to refresh. So now my app is up, now it's down, and you can see the additional detail. You can also see the status changed. And if you go to the trace endpoint, you'll see that you'll get proper HTTP status. So we thought about that quite hard to make sure it's compliant with the spec and it does what you think it will do, what you expect it to do. Info endpoint, nothing. Info endpoint is the things that you want to expose, the information that you want to expose about your app, right? And we don't really know what kind of default info we could expose for you. Turns out that I'm doing that talk for quite a while now on Spring Boot 1.2, 1.3, and now 1.4, every time changing a bit the message to include the new features. And as a matter of fact, in 1.4 there is something that we can use to make that better. So I'm going to add a new goal here, again, in the right place. If you use Gradle, it will work as well. So both exposed a goal called build info. So I'm going to cheat because I said I'm not going in the command line. I'm cheating a bit, sorry. I'm actually running Maven now, which will do something for me. So build info is going to take some information about your build, generate a file. Spring Boot will detect the file is present, and it will expose the information in it. What that means is, and you can add extra properties if you want. What that means is, if you want to expose something about your build, you do it in your build. You're not putting some keys in a configuration file that the build will filter for you, which is what you had to do prior to Spring Boot 1.4. You actually do it in your build, where it belongs. Something about that POM file while I'm looking at it right now. You can see that there is no version. I told you so. The only version that you have is the version of Spring Boot. So one major feature of Spring Boot that's behind the scene of this presentation, but it's really, really important, is Spring Boot provides dependency management for many Spring modules and many third-party libraries. And we have lots of tests that make sure that those work together. So if you've worked on an app with more than 2 dependencies and you try to upgrade something, I'm sure you've been in a situation where it doesn't work anymore and you have no idea why. Because the thing that you upgraded rely on something else that got upgraded that's incompatible with something you use, etc., etc. So you have to do that exercise yourself, and it's very, very complicated. So if you want, we do that for you. you provide a version of Spring Boot that you want to use, and you'll get default versions for plenty of third-party dependencies. Again, it's not limited to Spring. You can see that I added H2 there, which is not a Spring module at all, and I didn't have to provide a version. So what's the story, really? What I'm trying to say is, if you want to upgrade, you upgrade Spring Boot, and you'll get a consistent upgrade of the third-party libraries that go with it. So for instance, if you are on 1.3, you'll be using Hibernate 4.3. If you're on 1.4, you'll be using Hibernate 5.0. Of course, if you're not happy with that, you can just specify a version, and then it's your problem to make sure this is consistent as before. But if you're fed up doing that work, because it's boring, you can let Spring Boot do that for you. The requirement of having a parent, there is no requirement to specify Spring Boot as the parent. There is another way when you can keep your parent POM if that's what you're using. I don't have time to show everything, but basically, trust me, that works. Okay, so I've been in the IDE for 45 minutes now, pretty much. I've been coding in the IDE, starting things in the IDE. You can debug very easily. DevTools gives you great experience if you want to change code. But how do I ship that? How do I run that in production? How do I run that in QA? This is a question that you probably might be asking right now. So let's see. Let's run that thing. So going on the command line for the first time. This is my default test running. I didn't have a chance to show you how Spring Boot 1.4 is great for testing, but I'm happy to discuss that with any of you after the talk. Oh, there is also a Spring Buff tonight, if you want to discuss that. So back to the basics, right? If you've been, when you were learning Java at university, college, whatsoever, you had to create a main class, right, with something that does 1+1 or read something from the prompt and then just display it. You probably did that. And that was easy, and you were compiling Java on the command line, or maybe I'm too old and you don't do those things anymore. And then at some point, you had to learn what jar is, the jar packaging system is. So you would package your class, in a jar with some manifest entry, and then you would run the jar, and your little command line application was running, right? These days were really, really simple. We enjoyed that. And then we tried to work on real app, and it was a bit different, a bit more complex. Well, how do you start a Spring Boot app? You do this. And it starts, right? So java-jar something, done. Your app is a process. Tomcat is in it. Again, if you want Jetty on the toe, you can do so. We are compatible with that. But your app is a jar file. It's a web application, and it's a jar file. It's the same thing when you learn the basics of Java. So we're really back to the basics, back to very simple things with Spring Boot. And my app is running, and my app crashed. Oh, actually it did. Why? Because it's still running here, right? So I have two applications on the same port, and one of them can't take that port because it's the same. So you might expect a gigantic stack trace. With Java, you know, gigantic stack trace. This is what you get with Spring Boot 1.4. So you get this nice error message that tells you application failed to start. Something failed, and gives you some context about what happened. In this case, the error report is telling you that port 8080 is already in use, so you should choose a different port or look what application is actually running and maybe stop it. This is an open SPI, okay? So we've implemented that for many things, like if you have GSR 303 validation in your config, and you want to make sure that your configuration is valid on startup, you'll get an error report that tells you that key was not valid because of that constraint. Plenty of error of the context. So for instance, if a bean is not found, instead of some gigantic stack trace, you'll get a report that says That bean couldn't be injected into that bean, and here's why. Oh, here's the things that you could do to solve the problem. So remember about this, that code that I wrote to add a new Earth indicator to the system. If you want to add a new failure analyzer to the system, you can do so. You can contribute it, or you can have that for your own exception types. So Spring Boot is really, really open, and you can use the SPI that we use. You can use that in your own project. So I'm going to fix it, and the way to fix it is either to stop my app or change the port. So I'm going to change the port. I'm going to say this. So -- server.port 7070. Let's see what happens on 7070. I will have to log in, I guess. Yes. Here we go. I have an app on 7070. So if we go back to my little file here, I get all the embedded container options available, as you might expect. So Spring Boot embeds the servlet container for you, if you decide to do so. But it's not something where you can't configure anything. Actually, there's plenty of options. You can configure the thread pooling. You can configure basic stuff like the context path. You can configure SSL if you want to use that. So it's not a demo. It's not something for a demo. It's not something for a prototype. It's not something for a proof of concept. Spring Boot is really an application that you can use from early stage of development to production. And the options that have been defined here are actually there is very deep customization about the embedded container and other pieces of Spring Boot. So if we go back here, you'll see I wrote -- That's the command line switch thing. So there is plenty of ways for you to specify those arguments. You've seen application properties in the jar file, which is quite basic because once the jar is built, you can change anything. You can specify environment variables. You can specify system properties. You can have that as command line switch, like I mentioned. You can have an application properties sitting alongside the jar file. So if you have application properties in your jar and you run it, it will read the thing in the application properties next to your jar. You can use GNDI if that's what you want to use. So there's plenty of options, and you can also add yours. So for instance, we have many users reading configuration from database. So they implement an API, they just go read the keys in their database, and it will automatically integrate into the system. Right. I think that's it. That's what I wanted to show you today, and I have 7 minutes for questions. Thank you.
Thanks for the talk. In your opinion, I actually wanted to ask 2 questions. The first one would be, do you think that every new project that chooses to use Spring should use Spring Boot and not just regular Spring with all these configurations?
So let me rephrase to make sure I got it, because I'm not sure I get the beginning. So if I'm using Spring, would you recommend me to use Spring Boot versus Spring integration?
No, I'm asking whether you would recommend it.
Yes, yes. So the answer to that is we are trying to convince our users to use Spring Boot for everything. And if you look at the kind of integration that you get, you'll see, for instance, for Spring integration, you'll see that you'll get great auto-configuration support for Spring integration. So things that you need to do with Spring integration alone, with Spring Framework, you don't have to do them anymore with Spring Boot. What we also want to push, really, is the packaging model of Spring Boot and the configuration model of Spring Boot. That really helps you with a wide range of application types. So our goal really is to focus our users on Spring Boot. This is the entry point to create a Spring application these days.
Thanks. And another one. What's the future of Spring Boot? Can you give us some insights on maybe some new interesting features that will come in future releases?
So 1.4 was released in this summer. We have 1.4.2, the bug fix, coming up in 2 weeks. And we are already working on the 1.5 release, and 2.0 at the same time. So the reason why we are doing this is, on one hand, we need to provide at quite a fast pace a new version with new dependency upgrades. So I mentioned the fact that we handle dependency management, so the whole Spring infrastructure now relies on that. And they also rely on a Spring Boot version that will bring those versions. So a new Spring data release train, a new Spring integration release, etc., a new Spring security release. 2.0 is built with Java 8 only and Spring 5. And Spring 5 has a longer cycle of development, so we could not afford to just focus on 2.0 and left users with a 9-month time frame where they don't get dependency updates. So we have 1.5 and 2.0 at the same time. So 1.5 is really small as far as features are concerned. So there are things that we couldn't do for 1.4, especially pull request, that we are going to process for 1.5. And should I shut up? So we'll have a release like next month, a first milestone next month, and the final release by the end of the year for 1.5. And 2.0 is integrating with Spring Framework 5 and the reactive initiative. So you'll have a chance to try that very early. Actually, you already have snapshots. So the main theme for Spring Boot 2.0 is Java 8 only, reactive programming, and deployment in environments such as Netty. So if you want to deploy a reactive app without servlet APIs, you'll be able to do so in Spring Boot 2.0. Yes?
I have a question.
Sure.
If we have a big project that is already using Spring Framework,
yes,
how would you see the transition, if possible, to integrate with Spring Boot? How difficult would that be? Have you tried to already do it?
So I have an app, it's using Spring Framework, I want to use Spring Boot. How do I make that happen? It's a great question. If you know Spring Boot, or if you go on the Spring Boot website, you'll see that we claim we are no XML. That's kind of, we're proud of ourselves because we don't have any XML in Spring Boot, which is true. That doesn't mean that we don't support it. So if you have even a legacy app using Spring Framework that uses XML config, you can perfectly import those beans in a Spring Boot application. We'll detect that. It's Spring Framework after all, nothing fancy. What I would do is I would do it in a 2-step process to avoid any, any pain to figure out why something doesn't work anymore. So first step is upgrade your dependency to Spring Boot. And an easy way to do that is to use the Spring Boot dependency management, remove all the versions that you use in your app, so you'll get a new Spring Framework release, potentially, and you'll get some new open source libraries as a result of that. And keep using Spring Framework. Your app doesn't change, doesn't use anything of Spring Boot at all, but you are using the same versions as Spring Boot. So you're not trying to migrate to Spring Boot and migrate from a Hibernate 3 application. So that's the first step. The second step is basically to move to the packaging model of Spring Boot, so have a Spring Boot application like I've shown. If you have XML, import all your config. If you have Java config, import your configuration files, and start the app. That's it. What will happen, it might work, it might not work, depending on how far your configuration is. But the rule is, whenever you define something, we won't define that for you. So whenever you have a security config, we are not going to mess with security config. If you have enabled WebMVC in your configuration, we are not doing anything about WebMVC at all. So we will plainly use what you've provided us. Then the next step, once you have the application working, is to look at the auto-configuration report and see things that could have been done by Spring Boot and that weren't because you had a configuration, and start removing configuration one by one until you get a sense of what Spring Boot can do for you. And that way you can migrate a Spring Framework application to Spring Boot. And my time is up. Thank you, enjoy the conference.